Boys and girls, how are you today? I hope you're having some fun. We're going to start with a little game just to get us going. So on your screen, you're going to see some pictures of some people that are in some movies that you may have seen, and I want you to shout out the name of the character and what movie they're in. Are you ready? Okay, here we go. Do you know who that is? That's right, it's Olaf from Frozen. All right, what about this one? You're right, it's Batman from the Lego movie, or the Batman Lego movie. All right, what about these guys? Oh, those silly trolls and their silly hair. All right, let's see. Do you know who this is? Me either. I don't know their names, but they're the Minions from Despicable Me or the Minion movie. All right, who's this one? That's right, it's Cinderella. What a beautiful princess. Who's this one? They're some of my favorites. Buzz and Woody from Toy Story. Do you know who this one is? Yeah, you may not remember his name, but that's Marlin and Dory from Finding Nemo. All right, I have one more. Who's this? Yeah, her name is Merida, and she's from the movie Brave. And the reason I chose her is because we're going to talk today about being brave. Now, before we start that, you might be wondering why I'm laying on the floor under this tent or this fort. Well, listen carefully and see if you can figure it out in our story. I also want to ask you a question before we start. Raise your hand. Does anyone have an aunt or an uncle? I do. I have lots of aunts and uncles. Well, again, I want you to remember aunts and uncles, actually uncles today, as we listen to our story. So something about a fort and something about an uncle. Let's see what we can learn from. We're going to hear a story today, and our story is from the Bible. Now, does anyone remember who we've been talking about? That's right, his name is Paul. And Paul was in very big trouble. But not for doing anything bad. He was in trouble for doing something very, very good. Does anyone have a guess what Paul was doing? Well, you might remember from our last few stories, Paul was really into telling people about Jesus. He was traveling all over the place, telling them about the good news about Jesus. Most people enjoyed listening to what Paul said, but some people who did not love Jesus heard Paul talking about Jesus, and they became very, very angry. Can I see your angry faces? Yeah, this time they became so angry that they threw him in jail. This jail was kind of like a big fort, so that's why I'm inside this fort. Well, while Paul was locked up inside this big fort, there were about 40 people who were still very, very angry. Let's see if we can count to 40 because that's a big number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's 10. Now we just have to do that again. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And again, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. And one more time. 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40. That's a big number. 40 angry people wanted to get Paul in trouble. So they made a plan, a terrible plan. They made a plan to hurt Paul. These men promised each other that they would not eat any food and they would not drink any water until they had hurt Paul. They were certain this plan was going to work. Was that a very kind plan to make? No. But what these men didn't know was they made a plan, but Jesus made a plan too. Paul's nephew heard these men and the plan that they made, and instead of being afraid of the plan that they made, he was very, very brave. Paul's nephew went straight to his uncle Paul, and he told him what he had heard. Paul called one of the guards from the jail over and said, "Take this young man to the man in charge, the commander. He has something to tell him." So Paul's nephew went to the commander, and the commander took him by the hand and brought him to a quiet place and said, "What did you want to tell me?" Paul's nephew might have been a little bit scared. This man was an important man. But he was very brave, and he told the commander everything he had heard. "The angry men want to hurt my uncle," he said. So the commander told Paul's nephew, "Don't tell anyone what you told me." Then the commander made a plan of his own. He called for 200 soldiers, 70 men, soldiers on horses, and 200 men with spears. That's a lot of people. We're not even going to try to count that high. Well, then the commander wrote a letter to the governor, and he gave the letter to his helper. And that same night, he got all of those men together, 470 men and some horses, and they started walking out of the city. It looks like a big, giant parade. Well, some men had swords, and some men had spears, and some men were on horses, and they all left that night by moonlight. And guess what? Somewhere in the middle of that giant parade, there was one man named Paul. He was sneaking out of the city, out of that jail, in the middle of all of these men. Those 40 men that were so angry at him never even saw him leave. Paul had escaped and was safe. Hooray! Well, the next day, Paul came to the governor's palace, and the governors gave him food and a warm place to stay. Guards stayed with him to keep him safe. Even though angry men had tried to hurt Paul, Jesus kept him safe because Paul was telling people about Jesus, and that was the most important. You know, Paul must have been very glad that his nephew was brave and knew just what to do. Paul's nephew's brave action saved his life. And you know, we don't have to be scared when God asks us to do things either. When we hear something that God asks us to do, we can be brave and do what is right. The Bible tells us we can have courage to do the things that are right. Would you pray with me that we would be brave and do the things that are right? Dear Jesus, thank you for this day, and thank you that you gave Paul's nephew courage to do what is right, to tell others about you, so that Paul could continue telling people about Jesus. God, help us too to have courage and be brave to do what is right. Amen. So I have a little project for you to do that might be kind of fun to help you remember to be brave and do what is right. And you can really use anything you want, but what I chose to use, I just had a cup and I wrote the words, "Be brave." Now you can have mom or dad or an older brother or sister help you write those words if you'd like. But be brave. Remember, Jesus wants us to be brave and do what is right. And then I just taped some strings on, and I had some buttons and some pom-poms, but you can use whatever you want, beads or bells or whatever you want. You could even go outside and maybe find some flowers or rocks to glue on, and I glued them on some yarn, and I made a loop at the top of my cup, and then I'm going to hang this on my door. So every time I go in and out of my room, I can remember that God asks us to be brave, to have courage, and do what is right. So boys and girls, I want you to remember that, and I want you to remember that God will be with you. He loves you, and so do I. Have a good week, and I'll see you next time.